Normally, when we focus on traditional diversity, equity, and inclusion, you want to know a little bit more about the groups. Like, how do I talk to someone whose skin color is different than me, or who has a different cultural background than me, who has a different identity than I do? And the more we focus on the group that is different from us, the harder it is, because we want to be able to create parity. We want to say, if that's racist, then this is racist. If this is discriminating, then this is discriminating. You take everything and you draw it back to you. And when that happens, you might get into trouble. You feel confused. What can I say? What can't I say? I think more important than the groups are the concepts. I can't really teach you everything that you need to know to relate effectively to all these different types of people. It's almost impossible. But if we focus on language or ways of thinking, we might get somewhere. If you understand these common guidelines, you will grow and be able to more effectively and comfortably relate to people who you feel are different than you. The first concept that you're going to hear a lot about is othering. So when you make someone feel like they're not part of the group, intentionally or not. So first, before we talk about othering, I want to take a quick stop and focus on impact and intent. So often, people focus on intent. I didn't mean to do that, and that should matter. And it certainly does. It matters if someone meant to hurt someone else. And I know that you probably didn't mean to hurt someone else. But when you focus too much on intent, you're ignoring the most important thing, which is impact. Did we hurt that person by the way that we talked or the way that we acted? Othering bypasses intent. We don't mean to exclude people. We want to make the most of their intelligence, their gifts, their abilities. But when your language and your behavior creates an othering situation, it does exactly the opposite of what your intention is. Instead of creating opportunities for connection, you're reinforcing the disconnection. So what is othering? Othering happens when you ask questions without a lot of nuance, where you want to know where someone's from or where someone was born, just because you just want to know it out of curiosity. But unintentionally, you're reinforcing the fact that that person is different from you. Just think about it. This is an easy one to relate to. You've been in a situation, I'm sure, as a young person where you walked into a room and realized people were talking about something that you didn't know anything about. They mention the party that you weren't invited to. It's not that hard to make someone feel like they don't belong. Just think about the kinds of conversation that might make someone feel like they're not part of your group. It could be assuming that you have the same priority. It could be that you're talking about a holiday that they don't celebrate. I understand that you might feel like you're tiptoeing around, but the more you understand the impact of creating the sense of otherness in another person, the better off everyone will be. Do what you can to acknowledge that someone is different. Don't make the assumption that it's weird if you don't understand it. It's weird if it's not traditionally from your country. Because the one thing that you can count on is that people approach things differently. That's the human nature. We can learn so much from each other when we make room for our differences. The second one is about offense. And this also goes back to intention and impact. There are a lot of people that feel like we're getting too offended by all these different things and that it's wiping out the context of what would be our country's culture. One thing to understand about offense is that unless you are offended, you can't really comment on the offense. You can't say to someone, you shouldn't be offended. You really can't effectively say to someone, don't be offended. Let's go back to childhood. Do you remember an adult telling you, don't feel bad about that? Wipe your tears and don't feel bad about that. It wasn't their decision to change your emotions. It was only your decision to change the way you look at someone. Usually when someone is saying that they don't want someone to be offended, it's because they're feeling like the fabric of their culture is being wiped away, or they feel uncomfortable, like they can't make a step without offending someone. And in a way that might be true with the tools that we were brought up with, which were not really around inclusion or equity. It's easy to offend. But if you can understand that more important than our comfort, more important than the fabric of our culture is a way, a process that we handle whether someone is feeling excluded, offended, uncomfortable, we have to take a second. We have to take a second and look and see, are we making assumptions that that person feels the same way that they do? Do we need to ask ourselves, how would we feel if we were in that situation? We have to ask ourselves, how long does that person have to interact with us in that way before it's too much for them? These are real ideas that we need to think about. But the first reaction when you feel like you're being crowded by difficult situations where things that were normally comfortable are now offensive, think about intent and impact. No one ever meant for that to be. If it does impact them negatively, take a second and see what you can do. What can you do? What kind of compromises can you make so that you can include that person in the process? Because you can't really get the best out of someone when you're telling them to stuff their feelings. The third idea that I had for you, something that will make it so much easier, is to avoid having two personas. Something that happens when we feel like there's no winning, when there's no way, we don't understand how we are supposed to speak comfortably and clearly and not offend someone, is to split ourselves in two and have a public persona and a private persona. I remember adults in my life having a mask, and they had this proper professional public mask. And then sometimes the mask would slip and we would see what they really felt. When it comes to diversity, any kind of diversity at all really doesn't matter. You have to deal with your belief system. You cannot just say, well, I'm going to reduce the impact by just changing the way that I behave, but I'm going to hang on to my belief systems that got me there. What will happen is that while you know the right thing to say in public, when you're in private, you might be putting yourself in a difficult situation. You might say or do something that is really hurtful to the core people in your life. Much better to look in the mirror and deal with the language and the misconceptions that you have about people who are different than you. What you may not understand is that if you are friends with someone who is diverse, they are probably not saying what they really feel. They want to have a good time. They want to be connected. And so they're not going to blow up every social situation with what it is that they're feeling, but they still feel it. And so if you can create this sense of inclusion that doesn't just exist in the workplace, or it doesn't just exist in public situations, but is something that we live with and we embrace and we understand as important and essential to really connect with other human beings, then we'll be in a situation where we can really grow and change. It's not about putting a mask on. It's not about being quote unquote professional. It's about understanding and learning these concepts, because it looks to me like humanity is not going towards all looking alike and being alike. It's not going towards uniformity. It's going more towards nuances where everyone can be different than everyone else. I think when we learn to embrace the differences, when we learn to embrace the situation, that we don't wish for another time, that we understand that these things existed all along, and that what we can do is understand, and we can learn, and we can change and embrace the behaviors and the language that makes everyone feel valuable in your presence. Your intention is to bring people closer to you, and the impact will last for years to come.